The perspective grid in Illustrator. So we have a really neat way of throwing our objects into perspective. And we can use this to draw and create objects that are indeed in perspective. So it's more like a drawing tool. Some of you may have stumbled upon it. We have two tools here on the toolbar. One is the perspective grid tool and one is the perspective selection tool. We can also find these tools up under our main menu as well, under view and perspective grid, with some options here. Now, the perspective allows us to draw, copy, and do transformations in this perspective world. So we do have three types of grids. And by default, we end up with 2-point perspective. And that just means that there are 2 vanishing points. If I navigate to each side here, you can see that there's one on the far left and one on the far right. So those are our vanishing points. If I go under the view menu here and go to perspective grid, you can see 1 point, 2 point, and 3 point. 1 point is 1 point, 1 vanishing point. So this is looked at as though you would be viewing a straight side, a surface side of a box. It would be taking a box, holding it right in front of you, and you're seeing the front flat side. The 2 point is the option that we have by default, and that's where we have 2 vanishing points. This is as though you took the box and you turned it so you're looking at the edge, or it's a building and you're standing right at the corner. Now, as long as these vanishing points are at eye level, which is what the horizon line is, we're not able to see the top or the bottom. The third type of perspective is 3 point. Now this one gets a little tricky. This one is unique in that we call it a worm's eye view or a bird's eye view. So it's looking at a corner. It's as though you took that cube now or the building and you're right at the corner. So we have 3 vanishing points, one to the left, one to the right, and then either to the top or the bottom. And you actually can change these vanishing points. We can play around with them. So I could flip this if I wanted to and put the vanishing point up at the top. So it is really like I had mentioned, worm's eye view, bird's eye view. You're either very tall looking down, if I move this down, or up high looking down, or very low looking up. So that's why they call it worm's eye or bird's eye. So of all of them, the 2 point is really what we're going to stick with. This is probably the one that you're going to spend almost all of your time working with. So in 2 point perspective, we've got 2 vanishing points. Now to access this, like I just said, I can use my view menu and go to perspective grid, but also I can use these tools on my toolbar. And I think many of you maybe have stumbled by accidentally clicking this, and then all of a sudden you have this grid up and you're not sure how to get rid of it. The easiest might be to click the little X to hide the grid. You can also do that under your view menu. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this perspective grid tool here. I hit it, so now I need to show it. Perspective grid, we're going to show it. Okay, so we can now draw in perspective, and when I have this grid open, my grid is visible, and now all of my shapes here, my rectangle, my ellipse, my star, all of these are now going to function differently because they will now draw in perspective. Before I start drawing, I probably want to select the pane, we call it a plane or perspective, that I want to draw on. And we do that up here. So we have the left grid, that's highlighted. If I click over here, our right grid. If I click at the bottom, it's going to be our low. So this is where my text or my graphics are going to be placed. Okay, I have shortcut keys that I can press, 1, 2, and 3. Can you see that they are changing? 1, 2, and 3. See that the different planes are changing there. Okay, so specifying the plane that I want this to be on, I'm going to go into my layers here and actually turn off the logo for a moment, and we're going to draw on layer 1. So if I create with my box, I'm going to go out, and you can already see that the icon is a little bit different. I click and drag and it creates something that is in perspective. Let's add a little bit of color to this and take the stroke away. You can see now that I have this in perspective. And if I click with one of the other tools, maybe the ellipse, I can hold shift and it's still going to make it be a perfect circle, but it's going to get thrown back in perspective. And if I drag back here, it's going to get thrown back in perspective even more. Now, oops, I forgot to select my wrong plane. Let's put the right plane on there. It's still trying to do this perspective. All right, so what happens if we make a mistake like that? Let's go to our perspective selection tool and we'll just select them and delete them and they're gone. So here you can see this one is in now the correct perspective. And if I hold my Alt key down, I get my little duplication arrow and I can keep duplicating these things and they are thrown back in perspective. So I'm not scaling them at this point. Basically what I'm doing is they are exact sizes but in the perspective world, in proper perspective. So those are pretty easy. It's pretty fun to play with those. Now, what if I want to now bring my graphic in? So if you notice, I have a layer here with a logo. So let's go ahead and select that. Now I've got a lot of stuff going on here, so I'm going to select it using the target indicator on my layers. It's selected with my perspective selection tool. I'm going to throw it on one of my planes, but I'm going to make sure that I do it on my right grid. So I'm going to click right grid up here because that'll throw it right on this pot. And all I have to do is click and drag it to where I want it to go. And again, I can resize these things. I can click and resize my box here. If I hold shift, it constrains the proportion even though it's going in perspective. I can snap it to the edge. Okay. So there's my perspective that I can play with. How about typing some text? Let's go ahead and go to my type tool and I'm going to click and we're going to type text that we're going to throw in perspective. Now the other tools acted unique in a different way when I have this grid open. The text tool does not. So I actually have to throw it in as though I would throw in other artwork. So I'm going to make this be a little bit larger here. Let's increase the size to something a bit larger that we can see. This will work. And now I have to use my perspective selection tool to select it and drag it. Now I still have my other plane selected. That's not what I wanted. Control Z, undo that. Let's go to the left pane here. Let's then click it down. And again, I can resize this to whatever I want it to be. There it is. Deselect everything. And now if I truly want to view without my grid, I'm going to go to perspective grid and I'm just going to hide it. And there I am in perspective. So one may wonder, why don't I just use the transform and throw it in perspective using the transform control? The thing with using transform is that each one of your objects might be in a little bit different perspective. Using this perspective grid, they are uniform and they all match. So it's going to be perfect doing it this way. So that's the perspective grid in Illustrator.